Hello everyone. I am Dr. Eric Shiraev. I teach international relations, and we continue today to study international relations, international politics, and our topic will be liberalism, chapter 3. Previous lecture, we learned about realpolitik or realism as an approach or viewpoint in international relations. Realism was based on the premise that the key players in international affairs are individual states. They have different power. They all exercise their power. They build coalitions. They build a security environment for themselves, and they balance their power. Since they balance their power, they create big blocks, and so there are certain power centers in this world, and those power centers interact. And so within those power centers, states find their own place, they bargain their power, they give up some of their sovereignty, they gain some of the benefits from cooperating with others. And this is how realism works. In essence, as a leader of your country, as a head of your state, you care about safety, security first. You have to be a moral person, you have to be benevolent, you have to be kind, you have to be considerate. However, these things become less important compared to the importance of the safety, security of your state, be it a small one or big one. I told you about common misinterpretation of realism, that some students say, oh, this is about war, it's about just sheer power and immoral values. No, it's not true. Realism is about peace. They care about justice, they care about stability. However, they think differently about them, about these features: stability, justice, and secure peace. Realism is big on diplomacy, but remember those key premises. Liberalism is different. Liberalism is different, and this is an approach which, in fact, was born out of a critical view of realpolitik. If you can imagine that most people in power in 19th, 20th century were using principles of realpolitik, and still there were wars and injustice and people dying, people suffering. The question was, maybe there was something wrong with the premise about individual states and power of ideas to balance power. So maybe something else is supposed to be offered. Liberalism is not necessarily identical to what we consider political liberalism within countries. Lots of ideas, lots of points of view are shared with political liberalism, referring to domestic politics, but many are not. You'll learn about these similarities and differences. And traditionally, we tend to believe, and there's a factual evidence, that realism, realpolitik, referring to a conservative view in international politics and politics. So conservatives are likely to support realism, are likely, doesn't mean they will and they must. Same thing that's progressives and those consider themselves liberal regarding domestic affairs. They tend to be liberal in international affairs. And again, tendencies are not iron laws of behavior, they're tendencies. Of course, there are exceptions. Today we'll learn about the principles of liberalism. I'll give you examples from history, from today's world. We will talk about how liberals defend the principles of liberalism and how they implement them in their actions. We'll compare liberalism and realism, and this will be our conclusion for chapter 3. Liberalism is a school of thought, ideas, based on the idea that international organizations, international economic cooperation, interdependence, and democracy allow states to avoid power politics and establish lasting peace. See, from the beginning, from the get-go, liberalism is a critical theory, critical approach, because they have realism and they criticize it, saying it's not enough, it's not good enough, it's wrong on many points, and therefore we offer something new to you. And see key points: international organizations, cooperation, interdependence, and democracy. Things that associate with political ideas, freedom of thought, freedom of action, cooperation, democracy, openness, and finding the way to justice and peace, not through power balancing. Several ideas common for liberalism, and I said one of them, key central, rejection of power politics. Liberalism is a critical theory. Emphasis on non-state actors and international organizations. Remember, a key assumption of realism is that only individual states matter in international politics. So they are sovereign, by definition, they make decisions. Here in liberalism, we see greater interest in organizations, states acting together, sharing their interests, like human beings, like us. Yes, we're sovereign individuals, we own our bodies and minds, but yet we cooperate together. We solve problems together for our common good. That's the principle of liberalism. In many ways resembles this individual approach to politics. Emphasis on international cooperation and interdependence. Realism is not really into interdependence, because if you're interdependent, you are dependent still. Your partner is in trouble, you have to contribute your resources to defend your partner. Is it good? It's supposed to be good from a moral standpoint, but is it good for your state, for your country? Nobody is against cooperation. Cooperation is good, but in real politics, cooperation has limits. Your common interests come first. Here in liberalism, we see the emphasis on cooperation, interdependence of states. A spread of international law and democracy helps secure lasting peace. So here's the emphasis on common principles and common customs that we share, understand, and act accordingly. Look at this. In many ways, in so many ways in our life, we do things by ourselves. We come, go, we just buy tickets, we get into a movie theater. Hopefully we'll be doing this pretty soon, and we're doing this. We book something online, we purchase things, and there's a problem. We write a letter or call or text. So we regulate our life without any superior power. We use the superior power of authority, law enforcement, when we need this. In those cases, same thing refers to behavior of states. We don't have to have a big military power to keep peace in the region. We can agree on this peace ourselves. Liberalism is about idealism. Let's agree that if we believe that in our community, in our city, in our state, in our country, in the world, we can live in peace. One day, someday, we'll build a peaceful, prosperous, and wonderful community. It sounds a little bit naive, right? Unless we're hopeless idealists, and some of us are, well, we say that's a naive idea. Yeah, we can live in peace, but it never happens. Realism tends to be more skeptical. Remember, they're skeptics. They believe that we are not that good as individuals. We're greedy, we're angry, we fight for resources. Liberalism is more idealistic. It is possible to build such a peace. It is possible to be together without sharing common desire for destruction, or common necessity for destruction and acquisition of resources as the most important feature of the national politics. So it's idealistic. And also it's referred to, liberalism in international politics is associated with a political liberalism. Liberalism has many roots and many faces, and overall, it's one of the understanding of liberalism. This is a movement which was became prominent in 1800s, earlier, just later in Europe and then in Americas. The idea that we the people, should challenge the nobility and their inherited privileges. So the idea that the people themselves, we the people, supposed to decide our fate, not the king or not the queen, the Shah, or Emperor, or Raja. We the people decide this, and so you see the emphasis on this collectiveness, or collective decision making in liberalism. We decide together. Let's sit down and talk about the issue. Let's escape the dictate of powerful states, but let's decide things ourselves. So of course, those principles are interconnected, and there are more of them, but I put here most, I would say, most comprehensive and most descriptive ones, principles of liberalism. Briefly about the ideas. Liberalism is not just a bunch of ideas that occur in the heads of people who are sitting in the rocking chairs and just glancing through the notes and admiring sunset. No. It was a struggle, it was a discussion, and ideas of liberalism were created by people who went through pain and suffering, and understanding that something else should be done to the world, should have been done to avoid future war and build a world of prosperity and justice. I suggested three such factors. Intellectual roots, just a couple of examples. A work of philosopher Immanuel Kant. He was from Prussia, so German-speaking philosopher. Just an example of other people who represent his views. He believed that that's essentially human beings are good. There is a moral law within us. And then we, individuals who are responsible, reliable, make our choices. And we contribute to the governments. We elect the government. Could be an educated monarch, a king, in his view. But if those states governed by the people or by educated rulers get together and share their power and make collective decisions, then the war would be avoided, and people will rule by reason. Reason will rule people. People will rule using reason. Work of Norman Angell, an economist who showed with great persuasion early in the 20th century that destruction is essence of war. Wars destroy economies, economies suffer, and if in the past, well, wars, yeah, were destructive too, but they couldn't bring such a devastation to economies. In the 20th century, the negative outcome of any military conflict is too devastating to use it as a means to resolve political disagreements between or among states. Work of a sociologist, philosopher, Joseph Schumpeter. Maybe it's not that well known, but let's discuss the contribution, not the fame of individuals. One of his ideas about that, if you educate, if you enlighten people, they turn away from violence. They turn it off. They find other solutions. So if you can use power to persuade, if you can use power to argue, if you use power to reason your point of view, if you have power to listen to other people and agree to disagree and then find a compromise, this is the solution to, or a solution to many of our problems, not only on the interpersonal level, but also on the level of states. See, free people who make rational choices, who build a prosperous community, who reason and argue using reason. So these individuals should not have a power politics in their minds, because they can negotiate and can develop any projects they want because of their education background and their moral values. Liberalism was also reinforced by certain actions. States began to think about disarmament a long time ago. Of course, the key issue is trust. If I disarm myself, how about others? But see, that's the point. The more and more political leaders began to understand that, say, if we all, at least most powerful states, begin to limit the hunger for weapons and begin disarming themselves, that everybody will benefit. Everybody would benefit out of this. Of course, these ideas were naive, yet there were ideas, and they just took over the minds and hearts of a growing number of people in the 20th century. early 20th century, 100 years ago, 90 years ago, there were several agreements, or at least attempts to sign agreements about limiting war, or actually canceling war once and for all, beginning conferences in The Hague in the early 20th century, which in fact put together the laws of war. Sounds a little bit strange, laws of war. Well, war is supposed to be fought with particular rules. When we study international law, we will return to this subject, say what kind of rules there were invented and put together. And still, despite skepticism, those rules, more often than not, later on in the 20th century, were used by the states. It's about not targeting the civilians. There were plenty of violations of this rule. The treatment of prisoners of war, plenty of violations, but there were violations of a common principle which was accepted by the growing number of states, how to avoid brutality, limit the brutality of contemporary war. So idealistic ideas, intellectual roots about limiting war and increasing cooperation, then actual attempts, and then one of the factors which is difficult to measure in political science, the lessons of devastation and war. And we talk about 20th century, but these examples are quite obviously fine to use in many other cases in the 20th century and the 21st century. The World War I was a devastating event, and this is the reason why I emphasize this, that time resembled early globalization of the 21st century. We discussed 1900s, 1900 and later, the first 10, 14 years of that century. Well, the world was turning global. People started to travel for easier rails and cross-Atlantic travel. Education became available. People learned more and so got more educated. Literature, art, sciences. People start buying products via catalogs. This was unheard of. Some countries would ease the cross-border crossing. You get a passport and go, and the visa is not needed. That was a just exciting period, and peace was right there. Prosperity was right there. It's justice, peace, and democracy for all. And then 1914, August, all ideas were crossed. We discussed the lost generation of people. This is a term that historians use, the lost generation, talking about individuals who were young at the time and the dreams were crushed, literally, in 1914 when the war started. The lessons of war, the devastation, the death, the destruction of all those things made that generation of individuals think about what they can do to stop this madness and build a new world on new principles. If the old principles didn't work, that's logical. If they didn't work, despite all they tried, despite all the attempts to balance power, it didn't work. Maybe there was something wrong with those principles. I don't think this is an illogical point of view. It's very logical. Let's think about something else. And that was the premise of liberalism 100 years ago. It's relatively young point of view in international relations. Well, a few examples. Let's move fast. You'll find that's liberalism is individuals who would not only witness the developments, but will think, write about this, and their ideas would be picked up by people in power. So their ideas expressed by journalists, scholars, professors, commentators, and the people in power who listen to the advisors and journalists, and then people in power form and formulate their ideas. So a big idea in liberalism is that not single individual states, they are sovereign and will remain sovereign. However, when they get together, when they understand that my interest affect your interest and their interest, let's discuss our interest and maximize our interest and minimize our losses for the sake of everybody, not my state only, but everybody. That's the principle supposed to be global, universal. So one of the ideas of neoliberalism, that states supposed to get together and form organizations that will be handling the affairs of global community, local communities. So the United Nations is one of the examples of this liberal institution. Countries come there, join, and they decide on things. We know UN has a number of difficulties, but who doesn't have difficulties? It's a painful process of development. This is our life, this is history. But remember, institutionalism is one of the signatures of liberalism and neoliberalism. Not only emphasis on goodwill, kindness, and the desire for perfection in the world, but also the desire to get together and act through international institutions. Idealism still has been a signature of realism too, but idealism was able to be implemented. It sounds a little bit awkward. Idealism implemented. Ideas become reality. Ideas become reality. And every idealist, I think, believes that her ideas, his ideas, one day, someday, will become our reality, tangible reality of our lives. One of such idealists who saw the results of his ideas was Mikhail Gorbachev, the person who was born and raised in Russia, was born in 1931, and he was a top Communist Party leader in the Soviet Union. And due to a number of circumstances, which is not just my goal to discuss, but number of circumstances, personal, political, ideological, other random and not so random factors, changed his mind. He realized that to live in a prosperous world, to save his country from economic collapse, to give people a chance to live in a different world, a world of freedom, of justice, of democracy, of free choice, of prosperity. To do that, his governments were supposed to change foreign policy and offer a non-confrontational course in relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, which were rivals since 1940s. So more than 40 years of rivalry end up with those ideas. He put together 3 principles in his book, Perestroika, New Thinking for Our Country and the World. Rejection of use of force in foreign policy. So if all of us pledge not to use force, and we guarantee this pledge, it's one important step. Second, if we put aside ideological differences, if you believe in this God, that's fine, you keep believing. If you believe that this form of capitalism is better than that form, that's fine. If you're for this and I'm for that, that's also fine. We may have different approaches to life. However, let's just simply not use it in our relationship. In certain ways, and again, it's a simplification, but think about your best friend who has a favorite sports team, but you hate that sports teams. You have your own sports team, college team, basketball, football, or hockey team, or NBA team, or soccer team. And yet you're best friends. It's very common. Think about this right now. Having a best friend who has completely different team in his or her mind. And it doesn't affect our friendship. I do have a couple of people who I tell them, I hate you for your choice of sports, and they hate me because I follow different teams, but we're still friends. Personal analogies are not perfect when we discuss politics, but sometimes they make sense. That's why I'm using them. And also build a new international community in which all countries would participate in decisions. That's what his idea was. The world of the 1980s was divided. The world of capitalism and free markets, and on one side, Western Europe, Japan, United States, America, Canada. On the other side, communist world, which was split into Soviet bloc, and there was China separately, and North Korea separately, and then East European countries, Central European countries, and some others, and then so-called the third world, non-aligned countries that they were somehow involved in the struggle of two superpowers. Gorbachev said, let's forget about this. Let's just form a new society. He was a global society. He was idealist, yes, he was. And yet his ideas were implemented. In my view, he helped dismantle the communist state. My critics say, oh, no, he just was responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. People cry about the end of the empire. I don't. There was an oppressive empire. There was a country which did not give people opportunities. Only few could get benefits from that socialist state. Only few were able to be who they want to be in their lives. The state guaranteed the minimum to people, and just simply people were persuaded and blinded to the belief that this is the ideal what they can have in their lives. No freedom of speech, no freedom of movement, no freedom of association. There was a society of bigotry and nationalism and racism in many ways, and xenophobia and homophobia. And so, well, he gave people a chance to move away from this. He wasn't successful. Today's Russia is quite different from his ideal, and yet he made a difference. And one of the tangible results of his policies was the formal end of the Cold War. Then, that time, and this you see a picture of the Berlin Wall, when two Germanys were able to unite. For several decades, German people were divided along ideological lines, one culture, one language, one history, and yet the division was made because of politics, because of ideology. And at least for a short period in late 1980s, the world in early 1990s, despite conflict, despite crisis, overall the world was, in my humble opinion, the safest place ever. So that period, late 1980s, early 1990s. Liberalism, four key concepts within liberalism. Those who support liberalism give arguments from soft power standpoint. They refer to lessons of democracy, diplomacy. They discuss democratic peace, and also they use the concept of obsolescence of big wars. Briefly about these four concepts, I'll be happy to cover them. Okay? All of them may require an entire lecture to discuss, but I will use just a few minutes for each of them. Begin with this, the idea of the obsolescence of major war. Remember Norman Angell, back in the 20th century, I mentioned his name, suggested that wars are too destructive to use them as a means to achieve political goals. We should abolish them. Here is a prominent idea came in the minds of thinkers and then people in power, that we do change our norms. For instance, dueling, just challenge somebody to a duel, was commonplace in 1700s. What people do, just you offended me, I'll just challenge you to a duel. I choose swords and go and fight him. What a stupid waste of time, but it was about honor. So it was an important part of a political behavior, social behavior at that time. We talk about nobility in Europe primarily, and in other countries also it was a custom as such. But then custom just became obsolete. It's just that's not important. Just you change your views and change your values. So John Mueller also talks about slavery, saying that was a part of a mentality of individuals. In the 1700s, 1800s, nobility and government officials and many others. That's a natural division of things. Just slave owners and slaves, this is how things are. Because just began to think about how immoral, how appalling, how terrible the idea was. And as more and more people on moral ground began to challenge the idea of slavery in 1700s, 1800s, and then it collapsed. Because of just change of people's minds. Same thing can be said about war. So 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, yes, just you believe that you have to defend your interest and just bomb and invade and annex territories and well, buy more weapons. More people in power, younger people come to power, and also mature people in power realize that that's not the way. Just we can solve things a different way. See, it's a psychological, moral change within people's minds. So we simply find something else in our political repertoire. Yeah, the war will be out of fashion. Second idea, just very briefly, it's an idea or argument which is diplomatic. And what about diplomacy? That we should accentuate the positives. If something was achieved yesterday, let's learn from those examples. Let's look in those few examples in the past when we were able to find solutions, find common ground, and use those cases in point to build new cases. When we study environmental policy, we'll use example of international agreements in 1980s that were successful. The countries, despite their differences, despite their ideological difference, were able to get together, sign agreements on ozone depletion, for instance, and implement them for the sake of common good. And many examples exist today, and I'll mention about them. But emphasis on diplomacy is key for liberals. Again, this is the real politics, in fact, also rooted in diplomacy, but it was different type of diplomacy. Diplomacy about power. It's about power distribution, power balance. Here is a different type of diplomacy, which is about not only mutual compromise, but also about building sustainable peace, and peace not based on principles of power politics. One of the key concepts, which is liked by students, it's concept of soft power. Why is it liked? Because it's, I think it's extremely promising, interesting, intriguing in many ways, and contains lots of potential, and lots of unlearned things. Soft power is a concept which developed by several scholars, but one of them, Joseph Nye. He has been and is a Harvard scholar. He's a diplomat and intelligence analyst, and he developed the idea that states, in addition to their military economic power, do have a special kind of power, which can be based on their military potential in the economy, but it's a different power. It's a power to influence other states, by example, through economic and social success. So its ability is, as we say, the ability to spark other countries' imagination. So we want to be like them. We like their model. We want to be friends with them. We want to cooperate with them. We want to trade with them. We want to be like them. Like in our life, we do have our role models. Soft power is about role modeling in a certain way. And it's about everything from sports to politics, from education to language. It's about hearts and minds. Some examples from the past, very briefly about them. Soft power, I guess three flags, such as French and the Russian Empire and the British flag. Soft power in the past, maybe surprising facts may appear. 18th century France earned cultural prestige throughout Europe among many intellectuals. The ideas of French Revolution, they were captivating, they were new. There were so many open and secret admirers of égalité, liberté, fraternité, of French type, so many in Europe. It wasn't cool in many countries to admire French liberalism, but well, it was very, very powerful. Surprisingly to you, Russians earned prestige in the early 19th century when Russians occupied Paris and entered Paris, but they behaved nicely. They didn't torture, they didn't loot, didn't pollute. They were very cordial and left Paris. Of course, they changed the system in France, but the prestige of Russian emperor at that time was Alexander I, and the prestige of Russian soldiers grew, and Russia began to play a role of European mediator for a short period. It's a country wise and strong and hoping for peace. Britain. Look at the elites and nobility and aspiring nobility in colonies such as India. They liked British institutions, the language, the power of their science. They send their children to study at London because they understood that it's if his son and daughter has an education obtained in Britain, he will have a lot of opportunities in Britain and elsewhere. However, I go thumbs down. Well, soft power can backfire. French Revolution was violent, and the violence of French Revolution, the guillotine is a symbol, unfortunate symbol of French Revolution, also contributed negatively to French soft power. Russians quickly turned to, from benevolent mediator of European affairs, they quickly became dictators, just holding to their power and suffocating the revolutions in a number of European countries. So they lost their soft power. Same thing, Britain, for goodness sake, this was colonial power. It was colonial power. Yes, on the one hand, many admire your power and send their kids to study in London and speak English because it's just they like English culture, language. On the other hand, that was a colonial power. See, and lots of prestige definitely was lost right there. My point here is that soft power is not just simple component. You have it or not have it. It could be like everything in life. It's just everything is trade-off. You win somewhere, you lose somewhere. You know, sometimes you bring peace and justice just to people, and yet peace and justice is delivered by Air Force. And so I speak symbolically in this, and you win something, you lose something. You impose your policies on other state, and some are grateful in that state. Thank you. Finally, you help our interests. On the other hand, there are others who are totally against these actions. So the soft power is not just against, understand, it's just a one-dimensional feature. It goes up and down in terms of its growth, in terms of influence, and also simultaneously, a country may have great soft power and also can have negative freedom. Feel free to suggest a term for negative soft power. We write about this, so maybe find something else. But yes, positive soft power, negative soft power. Maybe this is a term which we can use. Soft power is not necessarily presented by great, wonderful, democratic and free countries. This is a pavilion of a World Fair in Paris in 1937. And you see on the screen, it's on one side of the screen, you see a pavilion of Germany, and then to another side, the pavilion of the Soviet Union. On my screen, this is the Soviet Union to the right, and it's supposed to be to the left is a German. Well, shouldn't forget that there was a Nazi Germany at the time, country which government which preached racist, anti-Semitic ideology of colonialism and destruction. And the Russian communist system was also inhumane, despite claiming equality and peace and justice for all. Equality, peace, and justice was guaranteed only to few party elites, and the masses didn't have any piece of that promised power and justice for themselves. So any country attempts to impress others with projects, and certainly it's almost natural. Just you try to impress and build a soft power, and this is one of the examples. That's how dictatorships can build their own soft power. The Soviet Union, United States had significant soft power throughout the 20th century. I'll give you some examples of that. United States, yes, democracy, freedom of speech, prosperity, opportunity. Since beginning of the 20th century until today, America is not, the United States is a country which is #1 person in terms of accepting migrants. Think of other countries in the world and find out that's not just even close to how many people we admit every year. And talking only about legal immigration. It's just people still coming, and it's coming for a variety of opportunities, and one of them economic, of course, many of them political opportunities, freedoms, and opportunity for the children, for themselves. The Soviet Union, a communist country, had built substantial soft power. They promoted ideas about state-driven industrialization, and elites in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia were kind of keen this idea. Yeah, if they promoted the government control of industries, and I'm in governments, yes, that's not a bad idea. And plus, again, the model was working. Of countries were able to somehow, from abject poverty, move to not necessarily middle class, but get out of abject poverty and bring some stability. But the price of stability, of course, was a censorship and the lack of political rights. But it's a discussion which we'll have later in discussions. The balance between political and economic rights, between human rights, dignity, and economic freedoms, and so forth. I use the slide to show that yes, the soft power is a very fluid concept, and the United States. Country which was improving, gaining something on soft power, losing soft power. Is it that important in politics for a country to have soft power? So, supporters of real politics would say, no, it's not. Just the most important is your economic power and the ability to persuade, and then your military power, and then global situation. So was it important if President X has a very much representing power and just signing agreements with Britain or China? So who cares about soft power? This agreement is signed, and this is what is being done. I disagree with this point of view. Soft power matters because it about people's minds, about people's willingness to cooperate with you, people's willingness to use chances, be persistent. And it's easier to persuade people to buy, to support, to accept certain models that you consider right models of life, of economic exchanges, of communication. So I think soft power matters, and think about the examples that we can come up with. And in the process of our discussions in the future, soft power will come up on numerous occasions. One of the points to think here for you is my question about today: which countries generate soft power and why? And so which country will be the most soft powerful, I'll call it, by in 2025? Yes, European Union, but potentially it's huge, and it is huge measure of soft power. China, in which way? Well, it's economic production, it's stability of country, its ability to move quickly from abject poverty to middle class. Chinese model of state-run capitalism is found attractive in many parts of the world. Russia, again, it's a non-ideological position of the world. They no longer promote ideas of communism, but they also had this stability within the system, at least for a number of years. Stability in the system and state capitalism. Well, this model may be attractive, but add to this Russian culture and some other aspects of soft power. The country may have soft power. Think about this: whether or not Saudi Arabia today has soft power. How about South Korea and the power of South Korea, soft power? Economic, technological details. I talk about South Korea. Music and K-pop. And then traditions and food, and so overall role in the world of South Korea. I think South Korea has soft power, and we shouldn't forget about the United States, where we can improve our soft power, and when in which areas we have lost significant soft power. It's interesting to discuss, and also the connection between the soft power and ability to conduct foreign policy. Is it there, or just a speculation of supporters of liberalism who believe that must be soft power, or a country should have soft power to exercise its foreign policy? Just let's think about this and discuss it later. Peace theory, just another type of argument, just which I must mention. This is a quite intriguing, controversial concept. It suggests that countries stop fighting each other when they're democratic, and countries stop fighting each other if they become democratic and when they become democratic. The Why is it happening? Research suggests that, first of all, democracy is about representation. And if parliaments and institution of power represent my interest, your interest, our interest, we can reach collective decisions and less likely to commit ourselves to fight war, and likely to find compromises. So if we do collectively. Second, of course, economic interdependence. Look at this. Most countries which are democratic, stable democracy, important, they're prosperous. And so, have you ever heard about the potential war between US and Canada? Or today, it's a war between Austria and Switzerland. Well, it's just nonsense, right? You would say, because what's the point of fighting? Because they just cross the border, exactly cross the border and just walk in and walk out, because in economic and social interdependence is there. And also important idea about shared values and norms of behavior. Reduce the probability of war. What kind of shared values? It's about individual freedom, it's about economic freedom, it's about also your political freedom. So your body and mind belong to you. You share powers with others. You believe in institutions that represent your power, and this is what values you share. And your religion doesn't really matter. Your personal views on many things in life don't matter. What matters is we believe in a collective decision making in a community which is stable, prosperous, and non-violent. So the critics, rightly so, suggest that, it gives a temptation to some people in power, some politicians, to impose democracy, saying, see, you are non-democratic, we will force you to accept democracy. And then you become democratic, we will be peaceful. Those who support this theory disagree with this. Those who oppose suggest, nah, that's not the point, Also true, if you think critically and investigate, countries which are only becoming democratic, in fact, they become more belligerent or more or feistier, or more engaged in violent confrontations compared to stable, developed democracies. Others suggest, well, this is a secret way of imposing Western democracy on other states. Not necessarily because of imposing democracy, you prevent war. War probably will disappear anyway in the future, but this is the way to create, to model the democracy based on your type. So it's kind of cultural imperialism in a way. So interesting idea. And worth discussing when we turn to constructivism a little bit next time, about cultural imperialism, imposition of cultural political values of other countries. Is it happening? Was it happening? Is it happening? And our views of this also will be important. So, I ask you to think about this, just about wars that's been waged in the past 20 years in the world, in Bosnia, in Ukraine, and in Syria, and in many parts of the world, in Yemen, and Iraq, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. Think about whether or not the wars between democracies, developed democracy or not. True. Remember, young democracies, developing democracies, in fact, tend to be more belligerent than stable democracies. Very interesting observation. One of the most profound applications of liberalism, or examples, was a theory of famous American scholar Francis Fukuyama, a theorist, writer, philosopher, sociologist, political scientist, a scholar in international relations. He is a Renaissance man. And his idea, you can examine it certainly at home, his idea was a sort of a celebration of principle of liberalism in the 20th century, when most of us, and most of my professors, teachers, that time believed that finally, by 1990s, the world had achieved a stable period of stability, progress, inevitable progress, justice, and endless benefits. And so Fukuyama created his theory about the end of history, saying that before 1990s, it was a world based on hatred, and so the world was fighting. People were fighting each other, and so political blocs and divisions with the absence of ideological confrontation, with the absence of political divisions. Now the world will reach a new stage of free, liberal democracy for all of us. That's the model which the world will accept. The institutions which elected by people, their court system, free media, free markets, which is regulated by the government, and those who are in need are helped. So we're healthy, we live long, we're educated, we live in peace, we don't discriminate against one another. And that's the world of the future, and each state will resemble each other. And it's a new history for the world civilization. That's why he called the end of history of a previous world. Of course, Fukuyama is one of the most quoted and criticized scholars, and criticized because pessimists like to criticize. Even optimists suggest, well, maybe he was prematurely optimistic about the future of the world. But this incredible theory, again, it's just the end of history, his book. It's available, or at least read summaries of this book and critical assessments of his idea. He was honest, he was sincere at the time when he wrote the book, and he was optimistic about this. Who knows? Hopefully his ideas one day, someday will become reality. So weakness of his theory has been, and you think about this, but one of the weaknesses was he, like many liberal theories, they don't know, the theorists behind those theories, they don't know what to do with the culprits, those who violate the rules. It is so easy to get those heads together, create those rules of collective existence, collective cooperation, peace and justice for all, and we live by those rules. We are happy, but there are some of us, unfortunately, who use our willingness to be open, our willingness to cooperate, our willingness to help as our weakness, and they exploit us, and they attack us from behind, and they grab things, and we don't have tools in our theory, in our liberal world, to protect us. So realists now laugh, saying, see, we told you, it's about power. It's about power, it's about power sharing, it's about national security. Liberal idea was different. And no one within liberalism suggests that we need just to trust everyone and just don't defend ourselves and just sing songs together holding hands. No, but one of the weaknesses of liberalism, and liberalism has many weaknesses and many strengths, but one of the weaknesses is very, very tough time explaining what to do with those who violate the rules of commonwealth, of our common existence. What should we do with them? And so, well, it's a work in progress. In conclusion, I'll just refer to a couple of slides, suggest that liberalism has been innovative in terms of international relations theory and political science theory, because from the standpoint of realism, public opinion plays no role in the formulation of foreign policy decisions. People may be good, but just to be good is not enough. To be an expert in foreign policy and diplomacy, so therefore only the elites are capable of making those decisions on behalf of people. Liberalism comes up with different ideas, saying, true, for centuries, diplomacy was extremely detached, from public control, absolutely detached. Only in 20th century, step by step, we just see the change. The foreign policy is made still in offices, and there are lots of secret decisions. Secrecy is essential for diplomacy, as we know. However, people have more and more power to control those decisions by people in power. And those decisions, the public opinion, your opinion, my opinion, opinion of the media, opinion of experts, opinion of opposition, opinion of supporters of parliament, presidents, all opinions create a climate of opinion, or policy climate, as I put it. Policy climate is a sentiment which is prevalent among influential decision makers in the country. And often this opinion climate is based on public opinion. You can examine this chart, the table, which shows that Interesting enough, just we found that we took quite a sample of conflicts in which United States used force overseas. And so just an example that we used polls to just examine Americans' opinion about those military engagements. And we found that in most cases, when the United States was involved in military actions overseas, the public opinion was initially in support of those actions. If they were short and if they not associated with many casualties. Interesting. I always thought that's supposed to be just not the case, yeah. And yet, a short-term military engagement overseas finds support of American public for decades. But when the war drags on and the casualties, opinion just switches. And when public opinion is against any military engagements, there is no military engagement. We see several cases in conflict in Rwanda and some other examples, just when public opinion is against foreign policy engagement, military engagement, presidents extremely hesitant. Makes sense that president listen to public, especially during the election year. Not only, but this has become especially sensitive. Historically, U.S. presidents tried not to get involved in foreign policy decisions, top decisions, before the elections and during the election year. So the role of public opinion. And finally, I recommend you to see different kinds of liberalism. Liberalism has different kinds and brands and adjacent points of view. Multilateralism, support of actions of all states together. There's liberal isolationism, just the idea that we, for the sake of peace and stability, we don't do anything. Let people decide what they want to have in their lives, and just who are we to tell them what to do with their politics and government institutions. There's liberal interventionism, the ideas, idealistic ideas that no, we must help. Even though there's no law to support us, if there is no consensus, but because we have moral values, we must support the suffering, the afflicted, the dying, and it is our responsibility. What we examine in the chapter on humanitarian interventions. And also one of the ugly unwanted developments of liberalism was illiberalism or illiberal view, the idea that just a peaceful and just world can be built with violence initially. So we will use violence and subdue and convert people, and then there will be free world. So unfortunately, fascism, anarchism, communism, and fundamentalism, just based on this idea. So we'll crush the existing world, we impose our ideas on you, and then you will live happily thereafter, as a concept that some parents used on us, right? Saying, well, you do my way and will thank me later, right? And we say, why? And just simply do it. That's illiberalism. So you'll be free, but first of all, do what I'm telling you to do, and do it my way. Then you will be free. So it's illiberal. At the very end, there's discussion in a chapter about liberal empire, European Union, is it or not liberal empire, and also compare liberalism and realism. I ask you to do this again on your own. It's just and compare those two concepts. So this is almost all I wanted to share with you about liberalism. It's a vast area to study and discuss. We will talk about applications of liberalism when we turn to national security, when we turn to international political economy, when we study international law, and lots of applications in context of environmental policies and humanitarian policies. So we'll study this approach again and again. And as always, there'll be some questions which you'll find in addition to this lecture practice. And I hope you enjoy the lecture. And so next time we will study a fascinating cluster of approaches to international politics, which in which we examine alternatives to realism and liberalism, so the classical approaches. And then will be alternatives into constructivism, conflict theories, including Marxism. Then we examine feminism, post-colonial studies that see politics completely differently compared to liberalism and realism. But this will be next time. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye-bye.